Half of all Me-163 pilots never made it into combat, and many of those who did never lived long enough to fire their guns. The Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet was the fastest aircraft of World War II, but also the deadliest to its own pilots. With a climb rate 5 times that of the legendary P-51 Mustang, it could blast past 30,000 feet in under 3 minutes. On paper, it looked like a miracle weapon, Germany's last hope to stop Allied bombers from turning its cities to ash. But there was one problem. The Me-163 was powered by rocket fuel so volatile that merely touching the wrong surface could make it explode. To understand why such a machine ever existed, we have to go back to 1943, when the Third Reich's skies were burning. In 1943, Germany's Luftwaffe was collapsing under the weight of Allied air superiority. Day and night, fleets of B-17s and Lancasters bombed Hamburg, Cologne, and Berlin. German conventional fighters such as the Bf-10s and Fu-190s could not climb fast enough or stay aloft long enough to intercept. Every week, Germany lost more planes than it could replace. Desperate for a miracle, Hitler turned to his scientists. Out of this desperation was born the Wunderwaffe program, the wonder weapons. The jet, the rocket, the vengeance bomb, anything that could promise a technological shortcut to victory. And the Me-163 Comet was one of the boldest and most dangerous of them all. Its origin did not begin in a Messerschmitt factory, but with an eccentric German aerodynamicist named Alexander Lippisch. Before the war, Lippisch had been obsessed with tailless delta-wing gliders. He believed their sleek shape could one day revolutionize flight. When Germany's rocket pioneer, Helmuth Walter, began experimenting with small liquid-fueled engines, the two visions collided. By 1941, Lippisch's gliders had been fitted with Walter's rocket motors. The result was unlike anything seen before, a stubby, triangular craft that could leap off the runway like a missile. It was beautiful, it was revolutionary, and it was lethally unstable. Early prototypes burned, exploded, and crashed with terrifying regularity. The rocket engine itself was a monster, burning a combination of T-Stoff and C-Stoff, with T-Stoff being concentrated hydrogen peroxide stabilized with traces of phosphoric acid, and C-Stoff being a mix of methanol and hydrazine. Both were colorless, clear liquids that detonated whenever they came in contact with each other. Even the refueling process was an operation of ritual precision. First, a white tanker truck carrying T-Stoff approached the aircraft. Once fueling was complete, it had to leave the area entirely before the yellow C-Stoff truck was allowed anywhere near. The two vehicles were forbidden to come within 800 meters of each other. Ground crews wore full rubber suits because even a splash of T-Stoff could burn through leather or flesh. But, once fueled, the Me-163's engine produced a staggering 1,700 kilograms of thrust, enough to send it screaming down the runway at rocket speed. Although it could only maintain powered flight for 7 or 8 minutes before the engine cut out, turning the Comet into a glider. In that short time, it could climb higher and faster than any aircraft in existence. Allied bomber pilots often saw it streak upward past their formations like a comet, which is how it got its name. But behind that spectacle was a brutal trade-off. Inside the cockpit, the pilot sat just inches away from tanks of high-test peroxide and hydrazine, both stored in thin aluminum walls. If any seal failed, if a line ruptured, or if shrapnel punctured a tank, the chemicals could mix, and the pilot, the plane, and everything nearby could vanish in a flash of white flame. And that was not the only hazard. To save weight, the Me-163 had no landing gear. It took off using a jettisonable wheeled dolly, which dropped away as soon as the aircraft left the ground. On landing, it came down on a retractable skid. It was an elegant solution on paper, but in practice, it was a nightmare. If the skid failed to deploy, the plane would slam into the runway at over 200 kilometers per hour, flipping or breaking apart. Many pilots survived takeoff only to die trying to return to base. And if the tank still held even a trace of fuel, the impact could set off a reaction that melted through the cockpit floor. That was the reality of flying the Me-163, a machine so advanced it bordered on science fiction, yet so volatile that survival depended as much on luck as on skill. And still, the Luftwaffe pressed forward. By 1943, the Comet had proven it could fly, at least briefly, and so the first operational test unit, Erprobungskommando 16, was formed under ace pilot Wolfgang Später. They received their first A-model aircraft that summer, and by early 1944, the more powerful B models arrived. The unit trained obsessively, perfecting takeoff and glide recovery, but the casualty rate remained high. The engineers knew it was dangerous. The pilots knew it was suicidal. But Germany was desperate. So, when the Me-163 finally entered combat in mid-1944, it was the fastest manned aircraft on Earth, and one of the deadliest machines ever built for its own side. The first operational Comets of Jagdgeschwader 400 were stationed at Brandis, near Leipzig. Their mission was simple in theory: climb at rocket speed, intercept Allied bomber formations, fire, and glide home. Each sortie would last no more than 20 minutes. In practice, almost nothing went as planned. A typical mission began with the crew dragging the stub-winged fighter onto its launch track. 2 trucks of volatile fuel stood by, one white, one yellow, while ground teams in rubber suits filled the tanks. No smoking, no static, no metal tools, as one spark could erase the entire airfield. Once the Me-163 ignited, it leapt forward like a shell leaving a gun barrel, hitting 500 kilometers per hour before the end of the runway. As the dolly dropped away, the aircraft rocketed upward, climbing faster than anything human beings had ever flown. Pilots described it as being kicked in the spine. Within 2 minutes, they could reach 30,000 feet, straight into the path of Allied bombers. The problem was to line up a shot against a formation of B-17s required steady aim, but the Comet screamed past at nearly 900 kilometers per hour, twice the closing speed of the bombers. The pilot had 1 or 2 firing passes before the engine sputtered out. After that, he was a glider, alone, unarmed except for gravity and luck. The Me-163 carried 2 30mm Mk108 cannons, each firing slow, heavy shells capable of ripping through bombers. When they hit, the effect was devastating. One burst could shear off a wing, but getting those hits at high speed was nearly impossible, as even a split-second delay meant missing by meters. To make things worse, the high-velocity recoil often caused engine flameouts. A single jam could unbalance the plane, and once the rocket fuel ran dry, the Me-163 lost the one thing that made it dangerous. Pilots then had to glide home through a sky filled with Allied fighters waiting to pounce. American escorts quickly learned the Comet's weakness. They couldn't catch it during the climb, but once its fuel ran out, the jet was helpless, slow, unpowered, and predictable. Dozens of P-51 Mustangs began circling above German airfields, waiting for Comets to come down. Many rocket pilots were shot on approach, or as they touched down on their skids. Of the roughly 370 aircraft produced, fewer than 100 ever made it into combat, and those that did claimed only around 9 confirmed kills total. 9 kills for a weapon that consumed hundreds of tons of critical fuel, dozens of test pilots, and untold engineering hours. And yet, despite that tiny success rate, Allied crews feared it. Seeing a Me-163 streaking toward a bomber formation was like watching a meteor fall from space. For those few seconds, it looked unstoppable. Then it was gone. But behind that flash of terror was tragedy. Tragedy not for the Allied crew, but for the Germans. Every mission was a gamble with death, not just from gunfire, but also from chemistry. The slightest leak of T-Stoff could corrode through metal joints, filling the cockpit with toxic vapor. One operational pilot, Siegfried Schubert, was killed instantly when his aircraft exploded on landing. Investigators later found the fuselage had been eaten through by oxidizer that reacted with his sweat. Others survived only to be horribly burned. Training statistics were grim. During test operations, over half the aircraft were lost to accidents. Out of the first 30 pilots assigned to JG-400, at least 14 were killed before ever meeting the enemy. Inside the Luftwaffe, morale was mixed. Some pilots, true believers in the Wunderwaffe dream, saw the Comet as a ticket to vengeance. Others called it the suicide rocket. And yet they kept flying, because by 1944 Germany had no other hope. The Me-163 was joined by another desperate innovation, the Me-262 Schwalbe, the first operational jet fighter. Compared to the rocket-powered Comet, the 262 was practical, deadly, and survivable. It could stay airborne for an hour and carry a full weapons load, but it came too late and in too few numbers. The Comet, meanwhile, became a symbol of the Third Reich's final technological gamble, a machine so advanced it outpaced its own era, and so flawed it doomed its users. By early 1945, Allied bombers had reduced Germany's fuel plants to rubble. Jet and rocket fuel were almost unobtainable. The remaining Comets sat idle on grass runways, their sleek wings gathering dust. When the war ended, the Allies captured several intact examples. Engineers in Britain, America, and the Soviet Union examined them closely, marveling at their futuristic design and shuddering at their deadly fuel system. In a way, the Me-163 was both a failure and a prophecy. Its delta wing layout would inspire later research into supersonic flight. Decades later, NASSA test pilots flying rocket planes like the X-15 traced part of their lineage back to Lippish's gliders. The dream of high-speed flight survived, even if the men who first tried it did not. But for the pilots of JG-400, there was no such redemption. By the time the unit was disbanded, fewer than 20 Me-163s remained airworthy. The rest had been destroyed, not by combat, but by their own engines. That statistic sums up the paradox of the Comet. It was the fastest manned aircraft in the world, but also the least forgiving. A machine so far ahead of its time that it belonged to a future that hadn't yet invented the means to make it safe. The Me-163 wasn't defeated by Allied fighters. It was defeated by chemistry, haste, and desperation. In the end, it stands as a tragic lesson that technology alone cannot win a war. Innovation without discipline becomes chaos, and in the closing years of the Third Reich, that chaos was everywhere. So when we look at the Me-163 today, sleek, radical, deadly, we should remember the men inside it. They didn't die for lack of courage, but for lack of time, resources, and reason. And that's the horrifying truth behind the jet that exploded more often than it flew. So what do you think? Was the Me-163 Comet a glimpse of the future, or a desperate machine born too soon for its own time? Its story sits somewhere between genius and madness. Proof that innovation pushed by fear can burn brighter and die faster than anything else. If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out our other deep dives into the strange, tragic, and remarkable machines of World War II.